Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, hiding behind the euphemisms and flowery words of the previous speaker is the raising of the white flag by that progressive individual who is ultimately sacrificing hope and capacity because, contrary to popular belief, things can get better. But we contend that we debate in the real world, and we think that even if that particular candidate will never be able to win a seat, will never be able to be the congressperson, the president, or the senator of our dreams, it's a fundamental, principled alignment of a good in and of itself to be consistent with something you believe in. Because absent that, the point in which you sell out and the point in which you shift to a candidate who doesn't align with your political spectrum is exactly the point in which the arguments or the pejorative labels that moderates and conservatives say to the left unlock and come to fruition. They call you balimbing. They call you just woke. They say that you are an armchair protester. And all of these things at the point in which you sacrifice support in any way for that particular individual, because note, it's not just about voting, it's the point in which you weaken that ideology. I recognize that the previous speaker and the team, they might say that, well, Joseph, a lot of these progressive values are already the norm. They're already strong. But we think there's a chance that you can lose out on traction, lose out on virality, lose out on optics and support, the point in which we don't double down our efforts and be consistent with what we particularly believe in. Because this debate is really about how can we best be able to defend and champion progressive ideas. Things like rights for women and gender minorities, meaning the feminist movement, women and trans persons, or even things like being a check and balance against the very harms of capitalism, like human greed, for instance, and maybe a more liberal economic policy to be able to serve as a way to not get overly pulled by the right side with the strongmen we see in status quo, the likes of Donald Trump in America or Marcos here in the Philippines, who largely tend to polarize the particular narrative and pull you to the conservative right. We understand that the progressive left does exist in a spectrum. You have the crazy kind of radical far left, you have those who are moderate, but we think that being able to be consistent and vote with someone who is off that alignment in and of itself defends the full range of the Overton window and prevents any capacity from being overly radicalized by the dominant majority we're seeing in status quo. That is precisely why we see a lot of these strongman narratives being able to push back against things like abortion, against things like same-sex marriage, against things like the rights of the particular individuals who have been far too long been defended, meaning we have consistently been able to make advances in that, but contrary to popular belief also, things can get worse. Meaning, absent any form of meaningful support, there is a chance that you lose traction, just like what we see in certain instances of abortion and queer rights, and particular politicians can backpedal. Yes, you might say that these particular people might not be able to get a seat, but the unique advantage you get is the idea of discourse. We have to understand that the very fact that we're debating about these things in status quo, and that particularly among the discussions of those particular individuals, you're able to unlock and be able to expand the idea of people. The reason why it's even hard to be able to name like 10 particular protest candidates in and of itself goes to show how unsung these particular people are, and we have to understand that there's also a degree of intersectionality amidst their beliefs, meaning they can be queer, they can be women who also represent particular disenfranchised groups. Meaning, absent this intersectionality, what you ultimately have is catering to them as individual minorities and looking them in isolation, but we have to understand the unique complexity that happens when they're all together. Kyle, my friend, go for it.
So here's the thing, right? Discourse would exist regardless under both sides of the house. That's not the most important. So it would always exist, sure, in varying degrees, but we don't know about the difference it makes towards the actual election. What's most proximate is that when you at least do your support, you can actually guarantee that you get some level of change, or at least increase the chances for that change.
But the thing is, when you do not place your support on the particular individual who's actually aligned with you, The harm is that you allow those in the right or moderates who might represent fundamentally diametrically opposed ideas to what you, a chance to be able to win. That is exactly what happens when particular politicians and their companies are able to gerrymander and be able to bend the lines of politics in order to be able to allow their candidate to win. Meaning, we also think that by supporting particular individuals and as a consequence, not supporting those who are against them, actually can pull away votes from those particular individuals. And we think that even at worst, if this doesn't create any super duper meaningful change, at least we're able to make a dent. And the question that you guys might have is, oh, you're just one person. What can it do? What change can it make? But the fact that as a particular actor or an individual, on average, making these particular decisions reinforce the idea that yes, the outcomes we want are good, but the motivation of the particular protest candidates is something worthwhile doing. Meaning, if it were a timeline, you have motivation, you have process, and you have outcome. We tell you that the process doesn't just have to be running for office, but the fact that these ideas, because you support it, can start spreading to multitudes of people, starting to spread to people outside NCR, people outside the urban provinces, people even in far areas of the world who now know the name of these particular people and can put a face, an idea, and persona that actually humanize their ability to be able to carry out their message. It's precisely the traction we've already had in a very globalized world that we have to continue this fight, because in other areas, for instance, men, women, children, queers, minorities, they still don't fully enjoy all of the things that maybe people in more developed or more urban cities are able to take for granted. So, what have we told you thus far? We told you that it's a principled good to be aligned with you in order for you to be able to protect yourself and the optics of your persona, so that you don't get called out balimbing, you don't get called out a sellout, and you ultimately, fundamentally, like inside looking in, don't experience this dissonance, the point in which you sacrifice or sell short yourself for something that you used to believe in, and ultimately the idea of hope and change for these particular candidates, even if they don't get a seat, in and of itself allows them the capacity and the traction to be able to forward ideology. So, if you want to be practical and consistent with the idea, you still have to vote and support these particular individuals, absent any chance to win. We are very proud to stand on side negative.